Hey guys, Kenna here. Today we're going to go ahead and take a look at agroecology. So this is the first of our set of notes that we're going to go over for our unit on food. And today we're really going to be looking at kind of transitioning from what we've been discussing in terms of sustainability into taking a look at farming and the food supply. So this is just the first day. We'll talk a little bit more about food miles next class, looking at our journey of our food. And then we'll go ahead and start looking at meat. We'll take a look at seafood, processing, food labels, gap, these types of things. And think about how what we're doing is impacting the environment and what changes we can make to our food supply to make it more sustainable for future generations in terms of what they consume, what we consume, and how we can go ahead and make life better for both us and the planet. So let's jump right in on our essential questions. Number one, what is resilience and how does this relate to sustainability? So this is going to be a direct tie to what we talked about last unit. Number two, what is agroecology? This is a key vocabulary word for this set of notes. And what are its factors? And then number three, how does agroecology relate to sustainability? Now, before we go ahead and jump in and kind of talking about resilience and agroecology, I want you to kind of stop and think about the food that you eat. How much do you eat? Where does it come from? How do you prepare it? How does it come to you? And so I have a couple of questions. Now, in class, we typically go ahead and do partner share, kind of talk with your neighbor and then kind of share out. But I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just kind of write the answers to these in your notes as we're going through, and then kind of revisit it to go ahead and think about what that says about your food choices in terms of the impact on the environment. So, first one, the food I eat comes from where? Where do you get your food? And if you get it at a store in particular, where does the store get it from? And if you say a packing plant, something like this, where does they get it from? And so on and so forth. We want to take a look at the original location where the food that you eat was grown. Number two, food production likely involves resources such as what do you think is needed to go ahead and get the food ready to get to you? What are the steps that are in between it being grown or produced and you eating it? Number three, food production can impact the environment in that it how? How can what you eat impact the environment? Number four, food can be produced sustainably by doing what? What decisions can you make? Think about what we talked about last unit, okay, to make it more sustainable. We talked a little bit about this in terms of what decisions you can make. Eating local, we can talk about traveling in a more fuel economy car or driving less, carpooling if you're going to drive, these types of things. How can you relate that to your food? And then lastly, I know that some of the food I eat is processed because when we start looking at fresh food versus processed food, there are differences in terms of what that does for our bodies as well as what that does for the environment. So I want you to stop and think about what the food you eat is like. Where does it come from? What is the impact of that? So this is a good point to go ahead and pause the video. Go ahead and make sure you answer all these questions and then think about them. Okay, what is it that your food says about you, your health, and the environment? Okay, pause the video here. Welcome back. How'd it go? Hopefully, you saw some areas where your decisions that you're currently making could be improved, and some areas that you saw in your food decisions that are good ones that you can hopefully continue with. So let's go ahead and start jumping in and taking a look at resilience. Now, resilience is the capacity of a system, be it an individual, a forest, a city, or an economy, to deal with change and continue to develop. More and more recently, especially with the advent of COVID, we've been talking about the resilience of the youth in our country, the ability to adapt and change as we've had to move online. Now, as some of us are going back to distance learning, I mean, into hybrid. What does that look like? I mean, what is resilience if you were to think about what that means to you? So, it really is about how humans and nature, at least in the context that we're using it here, can use shocks and disturbances like a financial crisis or climate change to spur renewal and innovative thinking. How can we use what has happened during these events to better understand our systems and decision making and try and make them better for the future? This is really what we're looking at in terms of resilience. Because it turns out, whether you've thought about it or not, that humans and nature are very strongly coupled. And so resilience starts there, to the point where we should be considered one socio-ecological system. The decisions that we make directly impact the environment. What happens in the environment directly impacts us. And so, as we've talked about in terms of system and surroundings before, nothing exists in a vacuum. And so, all the decisions we make impact each other and our planet. And this means that in our globalized society, there are virtually no ecosystems that are not shaped by people, and no people without the need for ecosystems and the services that they provide. And we talked as well about this idea of nature deficit disorder and this big disconnect that seems to exist between humans and nature. And the problem is that just too many of us seem to have disconnected ourselves from nature. We're so connected to our technology and our concrete jungles that we live in that we've forgotten that all of our economies at their very base, all of our societies at their very foundation are fundamentally integrated with our planet. So resilience then is an attempt to create a new understanding of how we as humans and nature interact, adapt, and impact each other amid these ongoing changes. Now, at this point in time, I typically go ahead and set it up so that in class we do what's called philosophical chairs. So you have kids standing in the middle, and then one side of the classroom represents true, the other side of the classroom represents false. And if you're not sure, you can go ahead and stay in the middle, but you need to be able to justify why you feel that way. And so students would pick a side that they go ahead and feel is the answer to the question, and then justify their reasoning if I call on them. But since we can't do it that way, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take some more space in your notes and write down your answers to these questions before I go ahead and give you the answer that the data supports. All right, so here's your statement number one: true or false? The world currently grows enough food to meet the basic nutritional needs of everyone on it. Okay. Is that true or is that false? And think about why. Okay. If you need another second, pause the video here because we're going to keep going. The answer to this is true. It turns out that we produce plenty of food to feed every single person on the planet, yet we still have people starvation and people that are not getting adequate nutrition. Why is that? Well, we're hoping that we can learn more about that as we go through the course of this unit. Number two, more than 1 billion people work in the field of agriculture. Is that true or false? Okay, if you need more time, go ahead and pause the video here. We're going to go ahead and move on. The answer is true. Turns out that this is a huge portion of the occupations for people on our planet. Remember, we're over 7 billion people, so you're looking at just under 1/7 of the population works in a field related to consumption in terms of our food supply. All right, let's take a look at the next one. 1/4 of the world's ice free land is devoted to growing crops. 1/4. So that is a quarter of all of the non frozen land is devoted to growing crops. Okay, so take a minute to write your answer down. If you need more time to think about it and why, go ahead and pause the video here because we're going to go ahead and move on. Turns out This one's false. It's actually one third, not one fourth. So even more land is actually devoted to growing crops. We briefly talked before in one of our earlier lectures about the fact that as the population is continuing to grow, the average American, just to support themselves in terms of food and fiber, needs about the size of a football field, something like Autzen Stadium. That's a lot of land. And if you think about how big the population is and the fact that we do grow enough food right now to meet the nutritional needs of everyone, that's a lot of land. And it turns out it's one third of the world's ice free land. Okay. Let's try some more. One half of the agricultural crops are consumed as food. The other half is used for meat production, biofuel production, or is thrown away. Okay. Let's take a minute to think about that. One half, so that's 50% of the agricultural crops are consumed as food. The other half is used for meat production, biofuel production, or thrown away. Okay. Okay. If you need more time, that's okay. Pause the video here. We'll go ahead and continue to go. This one's actually false. It's about 29% that is used for waste, that is lost to waste, used for meat or turned into biofuels. Um, so most of it is actually going to go ahead and end up being consumed. It's about 29%. All right. So of 50,000 plant edible species, only 102 supply most of the world's food calories. Okay. We have identified um, actually over this, but about 50,000 edible plant species. And of those 50,000, we only really eat about 102 of them to provide most of our calories. So, again, true or false, and why? So, take a minute, think about that. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video here, and we'll go ahead and move on. All right, so the answer here is false. It turns out that of the about 50,000 edible plant species, we only consume mostly about 14 of them. That's it. We are not very diverse in what we consume. And of that, most of that falls into a category of the three big ones: wheat, rice, and corn. Those are our major staple crops. And so 3 out of 50,000 make up the biggest bulk of it, with only about 14 that are in high consumption. All right. Meat consumption is the largest factor in the growing ecological footprint in affluent nations. Okay, so think about the ecological footprints you guys did earlier in the term. Is meat consumption the largest factor in why those are getting bigger in richer nations? Okay. Take a minute, true or false, and why. If you need more time, go ahead and pause the video here, and we'll go ahead and continue to move on. Answer here, this is actually true. Turns out that the wealthier a country gets, the more meat they tend to eat, which in turn has a negative impact on the environment that we live in. All right. So, hopefully, those kind of gave you a preview of some of the things that we're going to be covering as we go ahead and go through our unit on food. And I wanted to kind of start you thinking off based on this quote. This comes from Fred Kirschenman, who is a farmer and scholar. He's written books on farming and the impact of farming on the world. And he says, sustainability is a journey, an ongoing process, not a prescription or a set of instructions. Sustainable agriculture requires that we envision the challenges and changes the future will bring. I'm not going to be able to give you the magic key or the silver bullet that's going to go ahead and solve all of our agricultural problems because it doesn't exist. Sustainability is a process that really is going to help us learn to work with the environment around us to go ahead and not need as many solutions. And when they do come up, we're going to be able to go ahead and find the answers in nature itself. Now, let's talk a little bit about Oregon and it as a state in particular. Oregon is a top vegetable producing state and delivers a large potato crop. It also grows green peas, onions, beans, sweet corn, hops. That's a big one here, right? Sugar beets, and of course, the famous Oregon hazelnuts or filberts. Oregon is also a big producer of berries and pears, plums, and cherries. And we actually produce a lot of apples, although Washington is more well known for its apples than we are here in Oregon. So we live in a state that actually produces a lot of food that can be consumed. And so, as we go ahead and start looking at the concept of agroecology and begin to look at sustainability practices in terms of producing our food, I hope you'll think about what we produce here and how that could be translated into more sustainable practices. All right, so here's that big vocab word we were talking about, agroecology, combo word between agriculture and ecology. Agroecology strives to mimic qualities of natural ecosystems to increase farm productivity in sustainable ways. And there are four ways that we're going to go ahead and examine here in this presentation: efficiency, self sufficiency, diversity, and resilience. Now, before we jump into those, we probably should remind ourselves what we mean when we say sustainable. So, something that's sustainable is ecologically sound. It's going to be practiced in a way that minimizes harm to our environment. Two, it's going to be economically viable, which means it allows farmers to make an adequate living and produce sufficient food supplies for them to go ahead and sell and consume. And three, it has to be socially just. That means it promotes the health and wellness of food chain workers and communities and provides all the people with safe and nutritious food. Okay, again, safe and nutritious. And we'll come back to this later on in this unit, and that combination of safe and nutritious plays a big role. So let's start by taking a look at the first one of these traits. We want an agroecology system to be efficient. So agroecology recycles and reuses whatever and whenever possible. Just like natural systems continually recycle rainfall and organic matter. So the composting seen here in this picture enriches the soil, helps to retain moisture, and suppress plant diseases and pests. Composting reduces the need for chemical fertilizers and encourages the production of beneficial bacteria and fungi that help break down organic matter to create humus, not hummus like the popular Middle Eastern dip made from garbanzo beans. So, humus is a nutrient rich filled material that is in those upper layers that we start seeing, like forests have and stuff like that. These biogeochemical cycles are a pathway by which chemical substances move through both biotic, the living, and abiotic, the non living compartments of our planet. There are three main cycles that you probably went over in your biology classes that we're going to go ahead and focus on: the water cycle, the carbon cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. You could include a fourth to look at potassium or something like that, but those are kind of the big three. All right. These cycles are working in balance and are responsible for carrying away waste materials and replenishing the ecosystem with the nutrients necessary to sustain life. The next factor that we want to take a look at is self sufficiency. Now, in agroecology, we want to use as few inputs beyond what nature already has provided. So that includes things like sunlight, soil, water, and biodiversity. Now, the image you're seeing here is of dryland farming, and it relies almost exclusively on rainwater and soil moisture. So you don't see those big water wheels that are out there or sprinkler systems that are going to go ahead and water this. Now, the primary benefit here should be obvious: the ability to grow crops in arid regions That's those regions that have little to no rain, without supplemental irrigation. In this day and age of climate change, our water supply is becoming increasingly precarious. However, some of the finest and most expensive wines and oils in the world are produced using dry farming techniques. In fact, grains, particularly wheat and legumes, are grown in the geographic region of the northwestern US, which encompasses parts of north central Idaho, southeastern Washington, even parts of northeastern Oregon. And these have long been farmed using dryland farming. Now, the next category or topic I'd like to cover is diversity. And for me, this is one of the biggest ones. And historically, we've made some pretty big mistakes with respect to diversity. In agroecology, we make use of many different species of plants and animals on the same farm, and we benefit from their interactions. This goes back to the symbiosis that you may have talked about in your biology class or maybe back in middle school. And so in this particular picture, you're seeing a variety of different crops being grown, and they're rotated over time. This helps to limit the number of pests that are going to attack the fields. And in my mind, crop diversity is fundamental to agricultural growth. This enables farmers and plant breeders to develop higher yielding, more productive varieties that have improved quality characteristics required by both farmers and by consumers. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, specifically calls to secure crop diversity globally by the year 2020, which was last year. And this is a prerequisite for food security and nutrition on our planet. In addition, the wise use of crop diversity in developing improved crops can contribute significantly to protecting the environment. Crop varieties that are resistant to pests and diseases can reduce the need to apply pesticides. There are major downsides to our historical use of the monoculture system, and we need to make sure that we are not forgetting the lessons of events like the Irish potato famine. Although I will say to some extent we're doing it again today, even with potatoes even. This time due to French fries though, instead of lumper potatoes. Now, all of the genetic diversity that is out there is important because just one of those varieties, just one, might have the trait to increase nutritious value or to fight disease or to adapt to new climates with climate change or to produce higher yields of the food. So we can't retrieve what we've lost, but we can protect what we have so it's there if we need it in the future. That is probably the single biggest benefit of diversity in my mind. And the last big topic that I wanted to go ahead and talk about is resilience. And I started off this presentation with talking about resilience in general, but in terms of agroecology, we want to look at resilience as well. So, agroecology can better withstand and recover from shocks like floods, hurricanes, or droughts by being resilient. Okay. In this example here, you're seeing a picture of contour farming, which can help reduce soil erosion during heavy storms. Agricultural resilience is about equipping farmers to absorb and recover from shocks and stresses to their agricultural production and livelihoods. Now, some of these shocks are going to be short term. They'll be a seasonal thing. Something happened and it's a one time thing. Others are going to be more long term, the effects long reaching. Some come really suddenly out of the blue, while others are more predictable. And some are going to be more severe, while others will just slowly eat away at the farmer's ability to farm and earn a living. So, this ties into many of the characteristics that we've already discussed before. If we have crop diversity, then if one crop doesn't survive due to a blight or a natural disaster, we'll have others to fall back on. This includes educating our farmers and equipping them with the tools to meet the ever growing demands of an increasing population and the challenges of a changing world. Okay. That really is at the heart of resilience. Now, I didn't have a better, I wanted to come up with a better title for this, and I just didn't get to it. Maybe a better one would have been industrial agriculture versus agroecology, but it was too big. It didn't fit on the slide. Okay. So, what I want to do is I want to give you some different practices. And I want you to think about them. Are they good practices or are they bad practices? But then I want you to think about, do they belong to industrial agriculture or do they belong to agroecology that we've been talking about today? So I'm going to give you the list here, and I want you to read through them and think about, is that something that we use in industrial agriculture or agroecology? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? So, number one, relies heavily on the use of pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and fossil fuels. Number two, looks to nature or natural ecosystems as a guide. Number three, integrates a diversity of crops and animals. Four, uses a lot of heavy machinery. Five, grows the same crop over a very large area, what we've talked about as a monoculture. Six, raises animals on a pasture. Seven, rotates crops to help control pests. Eight, specializes in production of a very particular crop or animal. Nine, accounts for the unique qualities of a growing region. And 10, uses genetic engineering to alter crop traits. So take a minute, think about those. You might want to go ahead and write those down, pause if you need to. And then let's go ahead and take a look. Now, what do you think for this one? For the very first one, they relies heavily on pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, and fossil fuels. Is that industrial agriculture or agroecology? Hopefully, you were able to come up with industrial agriculture. Yeah. Agroecology, remember, is looking at minimal inputs. So we wouldn't want to use pesticides, synthetic fertilizers. Okay. Number two, looks to natural ecosystems as a guide. Well, nature, looking to nature as kind of a guide for how to behave, that's straight out of agroecology. Number three, integrates a diversity of crops and animals. Now, you see that word diversity? That was something that was straight out of our definition, the traits of agroecology. Uses a lot of heavy machinery. Okay. Heavy machinery really is only beneficial if you have a really big field of the same crop. Okay, something like the next one, monoculture. So this really is going to be industrial agriculture, and so is our monoculture for the next one. Okay, raises animals on a pasture. What do you think? If they're pastured rather than in feedlots, this sounds more like agroecology because what they consume in the fields, they actually return in the form of fertilizer there. And so these cycles kind of feed back into each other. What comes in goes back into the system. All right, what about the next one? Rotates crops to help control pests. I think that may have been an example I already gave you in the previous slide. So, yeah, this one's agroecology too. Crop rotation's a big part of that. Specializes in producing a very particular crop or animal. Yes, good. Hopefully you realize that's industrial agriculture because in a agroecology system we like to diversify. We like to go ahead and produce many different things that provides resilience as well as diversity in our agriculture. Accounts for the unique qualities of a growing region. Yeah, this is also going to be agroecology. You grow what grows well in a particular area. You don't force a particular crop to be grown there. Um, when you start looking at some of our historical farming sites, they bring in all of these raw materials, all of these soil additives, all of this extra water that wouldn't naturally exist there to produce a crop that really is not that fit for that particular environment. This kind of forced growing is what traditional industrial agriculture has done. But if we try and work with nature again and grow what naturally would grow there, this is a good sign for agroecology. And then uses genetic engineering to alter crop traits. We do like to see variants and traits arise in agroecology, but the direct tampering or genetic engineering is really more part and partial to industrial agriculture because we need solutions. Because as long as we have all of the plants being the same, there are always going to be limitations of monocultures. All right. So the last thing I want to go over is I want to just kind of preview what the assignments are for today. First one is going to be looking at the duck rice fish case study. When we start talking about the duck rice fish case study, this was really a technique used by Takeo Furuno, a Japanese farmer, and he tried to mimic natural systems as he went ahead and grew rice. So he puts ducks in his rice paddies, which are those big flooded parcels of land they use to grow rice. And those ducks, while they're in there, they go ahead and eat the weeds out, they eat the insects. And then the ducks, when they go to the bathroom, their waste put nutrients into the water that helps the crops to grow. And he also got to have the diversity of being able to sell duck meat and duck eggs as well. And as time went on, he added fish to his patties as well. And so this becomes another source of income. He can sell the fish, but he also has the fish going ahead and eating some of the waste and producing their own waste to help fertilize the plants. And so this whole thing ends up producing a whole lot more diversity in terms of what potential income they could have. But it also ended up producing 20% more rice than more conventional systems that grow rice exclusively. So there were a lot of benefits to this. This is a good example of agroecology. And so in the assignment, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and identify in this case study the efficiency, self sufficiency, diversity, and resilience characteristics of this particular system. And then I'll have you go ahead and pick one of four other case studies and do the same thing. Okay. The last thing for today is to go ahead and start a food journal. Now, we're going to be running this for a while, and I want you to kind of keep track of what you're buying, what you're eating, how much meat, what types of meat, beef, pork, chicken. Are you eating fish or shellfish? What kind of type? How much dairy are you consuming? How much produce? And then when you buy it, what kind of packaging is it coming in? Is it recyclable or is it going to go straight into the landfill? I also would like you to try and record your food waste. What is food that you're not eating? What food gets thrown away or composted? Now, there is a website that you can go ahead and use that kind of gets you started. This is they have their app. I haven't actually used this app. There are other ones. There's what is it? Healthyeating.org can give you eating tools to help you plan out your meals. Um, there are a wide variety of different resources you can use to help check nutritional facts and these types of things. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Stay healthy, stay safe, keep track of what you're eating, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Bye bye.